What if I told you that after this chapter, Sanji was one step closer to achieving his dream? Well, second dream, he's still far away from reaching the All Blue, but a new revelation in this chapter has made his new dream that he's had for all about 5 hours now a lot more realistic. Because, as we found out in this chapter, the little giant we saw hanging out with Shanks and rushing off to meet Luffy 3 chapters ago is actually the son of Ripley. His name is Colin, he wants to be a warrior, and he's apparently the byproduct of some adult time between her and a human pirate. And this is huge news. Well, I mean, kind of medium news for us. Like, it's cool to know that this is seemingly possible, but it's not something that's really important to the overall plot. But it is huge news for Sanji because, dude, this means he actually has a chance with Gerd. She's obviously been the giant the most excited over seeing the Straw Hats arrive on Elbaf, and she seems to have a love for humans that rivals Rhodes, but is a bit more normal. So, with this new information, all Sanji has to do is shoot a shot, and who knows, she might actually be willing. How exactly it's going to work, however, well, that's not a question I think we're ready to get answered. I wanted to start off the review with this because A, it's funny, and finding out that humans and giants are actually capable of reproducing makes the attempted arranged marriage between Loki and Lola make a bit more sense, though that also brings up some questions that I prefer not to have answered just yet, but I assume will be answered at some point in an SBS. And B, the main topic of discussion I've seen online around this chapter has been the mystery of who Colin's father might be, with the leading theory I've seen most being thrown out there is it being Scott Gavin. As of right now, there's no real evidence to this being the case, especially since Scott Gavin and Colin, in my opinion, don't have any resemblance between the two of them. But Ripley mentioning her husband being a human that was brave enough to face off against even giants, that line alone has been enough to convince most people that it has to be him. Also, it is worth pointing out that while Colin does refer to Ripley's human husband as his dad, it doesn't necessarily mean that he is biologically. We do have plenty of examples of adopted dads being treated as a child's actual father in One Piece. In fact, more often than not, if the dad and the child have a healthy relationship, then they are not actually related by blood, which goes into the whole idea of a found family versus the one you're born into. I mean, hell, that was even kind of one of the main topics of the last arc. But as of right now, I say we should take things at face value and assume whoever this mysterious pirate is, that he did in fact father this child giant, if for no other reason than to keep hope alive for our boy Sanji. Oh, and we also get a name for the bartender giant who gave Colin the food back in chapter 1132 before sending him out to meet Luffy. Turns out it's Mato, and if you go back and read that chapter, she subtly hints at being the child of either Dory or Bragi. I kind of figure it's one of those two because I would assume since Oda wanted us to know about her father that she must be the daughter of a giant that holds some importance to the plot of this arc, and they're the oldest giants that we know, or at least they were prior to the ending of this chapter. And she seems like she would be around the age of the new giant warrior pirates, so it's unlikely that it's one of them, but it is a bit hard to tell how old giants are based off looks given how slow they age. Anyway, as of right now, who are the fathers of both Mato and Colin are two mysteries hanging over our heads that I hope Oda does decide to answer before this arc is over. And speaking of Colin, he makes one hell of an introduction to Luffy in this chapter, coming in swinging his sword at Yonko, who easily breaks it before firing back an elephant gun back at the kid. Now, despite this being how they met, both Luffy and Usopp instantly take to Colin much more than they did any of the other children they met in the last chapter. And this is because, unlike them, Colin still holds up the old tradition of wanting to be an Elbaf warrior, which doesn't gain him much in terms of popularity amongst the other kids his age. In fact, they all kind of see him as a weird delinquent, but he's exactly the type of delinquent the two Straw Hats imagined meeting when they were originally brought to the school, so they're much more drawn to him than they are the others. Especially Luffy, seeing as Colin is someone he can seemingly let loose with when goofing around, versus the other kids who he was basically terrorizing while trying to play with them due to their much more gentle nature. But this right here is another prime example of what I think is going to be Usopp's big journey during his time on the island. Seeing how the land known for cultivating brave warriors is turning away from that in favor of a much more friendly culture is not going to sit well with him. And it's going to force him to really recontextualize what he considers being a brave warrior to sea truly means. It's a much more important evolution for his character, in my opinion, than him gaining a devil fruit or some kind of new weapon, and one that I think he needs to go through if he wants to truly master his observation hockey. And one I think a lot of the fandom needs to see him go on in order to feel like he truly deserves a spot on the crew. Because I've seen a surprising amount of people online openly talking about either having him leave the crew for some undetermined reason, or just straight up killing him off, both of which I am definitely not on board with. So Oda's going to really need to nail this character journey for Usopp and develop him as a character in a way that makes even the biggest Usopp haters turn into Usopp enjoyers. And speaking of journeys, we learned what a few of the other members of the crew will be doing, at least for the first half of this arc. Frankie's going to go and try to learn more about the atom trees by studying the one here on Elbaf, likely coming up with new ways to improve the Sunny because of it. Both Lilith and Bonnie are going to apply for permits to stay on the island, though I still say it's about 50-50 if Bonnie actually does stay behind or she leaves with the crew. I'm still going to hold on to the hope that she does end up joining the crew until this arc is over and we actually see us leaving her behind. Robin's going to stick around with Saul for a bit more before joining Luffy and the others at the party, and since Saul mentions that Elbaf parties tend to last about 3 days, they got plenty of time to catch up. And I think Chopper is going to try and read all of the medical books in the Owl Library. It's hard to say. I mean, we don't see him with the others at the party at the end of the chapter, but we also don't see Zoro there, and it's unlikely that he'd miss out on all this free booze. But getting back to Chopper, he did take an interest in reading all the medical books that are native to Elbaf, so it is likely that he did stay behind. But since they were originally giant size, unlike the book that Robin brought in, they won't shrink even when he leaves the library, which normally would suck for him, but as it turns out, the owl we saw in the last chapter, it does have the devil fruit ability to make the books grow once they enter the building. I think Lilith calls it the rear fruit, and she does imply that he can make people giant size too, so that could be a workaround to let Chopper read all the books that he wants. Oh, and the other half of the crew got their Elbaf gear in this chapter, handmade by Gerd, which I gotta say, for some reason, Jinbei's is my favorite. I especially like the dragon on his belt, though Robin's is definitely a close second. Now, moving on to the party, there really isn't much to talk about despite it being where the chapter leaves off. The only thing of note that really happens is that Elder Jarl shows up, and we find out that he's much bigger than any of the other giants, including Dory and Bragi, and for some reason, he has a sword running through his head. I'm sure we're going to dive more into that last part in the following chapters, especially since Luffy called it out, but there isn't really much to speculate on about him as of this moment. So getting into the real big part of the chapter, we check in with the 2 intruders that showed up at the end of the last one, as they unfortunately come across, unfortunate for the giants, not for them. Now, this Shanks lookalike, who I've seen a lot of the community come up with different nicknames for over the past week, my personal favorite so far has been Stabs, is conveniently quiet during this part, but we do see his partner ask the giants about how to find Loki, which obviously they refuse to tell her, which unfortunately leads to her attacking one of them. It's hard to say exactly what she's doing here for this attack. Like, we can see her seemingly smack the ground 4 times, which looks like it sends out 4 bursts of energy towards the giant, which results in him falling to the ground in pain, snapping sounds being heard, and eventually seemingly him dying. I say seemingly because it's impossible to tell based on the final panel if he actually is dead or not. But one thing we can tell from this panel is that the attack she used was seemingly hockey, because we see the giant's face begin to turn black in the same way that Oda draws characters using armament hockey, and the more it covers his face, the more in pain he seems to get. The best I can tell, she shot her hockey through the ground towards the giant and it entered his body like an infection, destroying him from the inside. And if that actually is what happened and it wasn't some kind of devil fruit ability, then this has me extremely excited because to my knowledge, we've never seen hockey used this way before, at least not armored hockey. So I'm really looking forward to getting to see more of this ability and figuring out exactly how it works, and if the Straw Hats can learn something similar. Like, not exactly this ability, it's a little too sinister for any of them to do, but something close to it that adds to their arsenal. Anyway, as of right now, the only thing we know for sure about these two is that they're after Loki. Why they're after him is still up in the air though. Could be that they were sent on a mission to kill him and try to take his devil fruit, since it seemingly has a power that is similar to what Sun God Nika should have, which means that this arc just shifted from us potentially having to fight the Fallen Prince to protecting him. Or they're simply looking to free him, which just brings us back to Loki most likely being our main arc antagonist. Either way honestly works for me because both had the potential to lead to really interesting developments and makes it certain that there's going to be plenty of action in this arc that I originally thought was going to be a much more laid back one. And I'm excited to see all that action kick off in the upcoming chapters, but let me know in the comments down below, why do you think these two were after Loki? What do you think that ability that the female intruder used on the giant was? And what are you most looking forward to for the rest of this arc?